now in this video, let's now discuss about the derangement or bypassing of regulatory mechanisms for the overproduction of primary metabolites. So earlier on, we discussed about feedback inhibition, whereas you have a pathway, and the end product of that pathway is an inhibitor for the substrate at the start of the pathway. Now, suppose that you want to overproduce an intermediate in that pathway. So why would you want an intermediate? So for example, it's your product. You want to produce commercially produced, say, metabolite C. It's an intermediate. So of course, as for commercial production, you want to produce as many as you can. So what should you do if that metabolite that you wanted is actually an intermediate? It's basically in the middle of a feedback of a pathway that is regulated by feedback inhibition. So in here you have your pathway, and this enzyme, this is this is the product. So your end product is the inhibitor for enzyme 1, and it can also be an inhibitor for enzyme 2. Now you need enzyme 1 and enzyme 2 to produce your desired product C. This is your commercial product. So what should you do? So in here, you want to overproduce C. You do not want to inhibit enzyme 1 and enzyme 2. Therefore, you do not want to produce the end product E. So therefore, the option here is to destroy, mutate, or render enzyme 3, the one that catalyzes your desired product C to form D. You render this enzyme as ineffective, so you deactivate the enzyme. So you can induce mutation on the enzyme, destroying the active site. So in that way, you overproduce C, but you do not stop the pathway. So there is no inhibitor that is being produced because the pathway stops here. So you cannot produce E. So this pathway is not inhibited, but you still have a continuous production of C. So you have overproduction of C. So that's the simplest actually feedback control derangement. So in here, an example, this is ornithine. Ornithine is a metabolite. It was one of the additives used in fitness drinks several years ago. So we want to produce ornithine. So it can also be used as an additive for vitamins and supplements. So how do you overproduce ornithine? So ornithine is part of the pathway that produces arginine, your amino acid arginine. So the strategy here is this pathway is regulated by feedback inhibition. Basically, the end product, which is arginine, inhibits the enzyme at the second reaction of the pathway, so enzyme 2. So in order to overproduce ornithine, they just destroy enzyme 6 here. So arginine is not produced, but your pathway still continues on, but since enzyme 6 is inactive, or rather ineffective, and doesn't work anymore, so you will have ornithine. You will experience build up of ornithine over there. It's more like how you do in traffics. So if there's a there is say an accident on the road that plugs up the path, the lanes, or for example southbound lane, for example, the whole southbound lane is blocked by a certain accident or a construction. So of course there will be build up of traffic before on that lane. So basically that's just how the basic metabolic pathway, or rather derangement of your metabolic pathway, actually works. Now let's look at how about if you have branch pathway. So in here is a branch pathway for the production of monophosphates. So you have nucleotide monophosphates. So it's either you produce IMP, which is, so IMP here is the desired product. You want to overproduce IMP. Now IMP is a metabolite. It's part of the pathway that is responsible for the production of your guanosine monophosphate. Basically your your nucleotides. And then it's also part of another pathway that has your so AMP and GMP. So basically, your IMP is in the middle of the branch. So IMP branches out in can be used to produce GMP or AMP, but you just want to overproduce IMP without actually doing or without actually producing AMP in your what do you call this, GMP. So in here, this is more of a sequential there is a sequential repression. At the same time, there is a type of cumulative repression going on. So GMP and AMP is a cumulative inhibitor for the first enzyme. At the same time, GMP is also an inhibitor of this enzyme. So what do you think should happen? So you have here, you can you can just destroy your pathways, actually the enzyme 13 here, and also your enzyme in here. So that's one of the ways to do inhibition of that, or just destroy or inhibit the production of AMP. So inhibiting two enzymes simultaneously is not really a good option. So if an alternative is that you can just, if we are going to choose just one enzyme, you just inhibit the enzyme in this pathway. Why? Because although you can produce GMP, and GMP is a repressor for this enzyme, however, GMP is also an inhibitor for this enzyme. So it self-inhibits itself, or rather, well, it inhibits its own branch. GMP is an inhibitor of its own branch. So you can still produce IMP. However, you just since this is you cut off deliberately this pathway, so you just, and in the overproduction of GMP, it inhibits itself, so you can have a buildup of IMP. So it's a bit more complicated than the previous examples. Okay, so how about another type of branch pathway? So in here, this is in amino acid metabolism, the pathway that has branches to form 3 different amino acids. 4. You have lysine, methionine, threonine, and isoleucine. So you want here to produce lysine. So lysine from aspartates. Unfortunately, lysine and threonine, they are concerted. So it's a concerted inhibition. So they join together. Threonine and lysine both join together. So they are concerted inhibitors of aspartakinase. So basically, in here you just remove homoserine dehydrogenase. So in this branch, you do not produce any threonine, and at the same time, you do not produce any methionine isoleucine. So you will be diverting the whole pathway to lysine. And although lysine is an inhibitor, the aspartakinase is works in a concerted inhibition. So even if there's lysine, lysine itself by itself, it cannot inhibit aspartakinase. So you can just overproduce lysine without stopping your pathway because of inhibitors. So that's one way of feedback control. So it actually depends on the type of pathway that you have. So sometimes it's not always, because the mutations on the enzyme is really very technologically and labor intensive process. So you can just do something more simpler. So one option is to use toxic analog of the product as a selective marker for mutants that are resistant. So you just look at the mutants. So mutants that spontaneously happens in your culture. So you can use toxic analogs. So you can select mutants that are naturally overproducing your desired metabolites, or you can induce the mutation itself. So that means, as I said, this is more the deliberate destruction of the enzyme by mutation is more technologically labor intensive, because first you need to know the specific enzyme you're going to target. That enzyme must have structural data, or that means you should know specifically which part of that enzyme, because well, enzymes are proteins, so you have which segment of the polypeptide chain is responsible for the active site, and you destroy that active site. So you induce mutations on the active site, and that is a targeted type mutation. You don't just randomly insert mutations. You just need to target the active site. So there, as I said, this is more labor intensive. So these are different excretion of end products by analog resistant mutants. So you have the analog, for example, p-fluorophenylalanine as a compound for phenylalanine, so for the organism Pseudomonas. So this is more unlike the intentional destruction of enzyme, we're just going to look for naturally occurring mutants that overproduce metabolites. So these are the different analogs that allows you to search for those mutants. And then sometimes you can just restrict enzyme activity by indirectly, rather than directly destroying the enzyme itself. You indirectly control it by limiting some organic molecules, especially the cofactors and the coenzymes, even the inorganic cofactors that the enzyme need for them to function. For example, you want to produce, you want your Aspergillus niger to produce large amount of citric acid. So you limit phosphates in your culture. You limit your phosphates, even the iron, manganese or zinc ions in your culture media. Why? Because these phosphates, these metal cations, are the cofactors of your enzyme that are involved in citric acid metabolism. So you just, instead of targeting the enzyme itself, you just target the cofactors, which is actually, this is much more easier. However, you should it requires knowledge that which cofactor should be limited. So it's not always a cure-all for everything. So another one is change the permeability of membranes, either make it leaky to using biotin deficiency. So biotin deficiency in biotin produces a leaky membrane. Your substrates can enter more easily in the cell. Therefore, you can your organism can easily process it. So you can also have fatty acid derivatives to interfere to your membrane. So you have examples of those twin 60 and twin 40. These are polymers, long chain phospholipid, not exactly phospholipid. These are long chain polymers that are amphiphilics. However, twin 60 and twin 40 are a bit how should I say, more expensive. And then you can also have produce some antibiotics or organic compounds or organic inhibitors such as penicillin, which is an inhibitor of cell wall formation. Actually, that's how penicillin functions as an antibiotic. It prevents formation of cell walls for bacteria. So other methods to disorganize regulatory control. So you can, sometimes they just do mutations, random mutations, and then using selective analogues, you select the mutants that overproduce your desired metabolites. So you can also do, this is more trial and error, simulatory effects of precursors. So you add some precursors that can stimulate the production of some metabolites, usually secondary metabolites. But this is more of a trial and error, or more of observation. You should know basically at least a background knowledge on how that works, how that metabolic pathway works. So other regulation methods, you have inorganic compounds. As I said, you can change, or you can deprive the enzyme of its cofactors, therefore destroying its catalytic ability, or even temperature. So sometimes, for example, secondary metabolites, they are generally produced at lower temperature. So you want to overproduce secondary metabolites, you do the fermentation at slower temperatures. So that's for some derangement method for metabolic control. So actually, the choosing the method depends on what information you have, and what exactly the metabolic pathway itself. So what the nature of the pathway is it branch? Does the inhibitory control is a feedback type of regulation? Is it a concerted? Is it a cumulative? So on and so forth. Okay, so that's for some derangement of control for overproduction.